Hi, this is Belle, and welcome back to my channel, Belle's Healing Journey. In this video, I'm going to talk about the basics. I'm going to talk about how we realize that we've had abuse in our lives, how we come to that acknowledgement. I will be talking about also characteristics of people who have been abused and symptoms that they show, and I'll be explaining those. Disclaimer, I'm not a licensed psychologist, so I only give advice on my personal knowledge and my own personal experiences and my own personal research that I have done on this topic. Please, if you're in immediate danger, please call 911. I will also put the National Domestic Abuse Hotline in the description. So let's get to it. So the first thing that many of us do is literally deny that abuse has ever happened in our life. We don't want to see it. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to think about it. It's extremely painful. And trust me, there's no judgment from me there. I have had my fair share of times where I just didn't want to think about something extremely painful that happened to me. But here's the thing. If we don't acknowledge it, we can't start the healing process. We can't begin to heal from all those wounds. And, if there wasn't any consequences to that, I would say, hey, let's let it be forgotten, right? But here's the problem with that. If we don't heal, or if we don't even at least start a healing process, that trauma that we experienced has consequences. It leaves scars. It leaves marks in our soul and our hearts, and it has consequences. And ultimately, those consequences will leak out into our actions, into our behavior, and we will literally have these behaviors onto our children, even our spouses, our loved ones around us, our friends. So it's really, really important to acknowledge the abuse, acknowledge that it has happened. There are those people as well that don't even realize that they were in an abusive relationship, or don't even realize that they were in an abusive childhood. They think it's normal. For example, my grandma, for the longest time, she would describe my grandfather as a God-fearing, hardworking man that worked hard for his family and that loved church. And honestly, that was far from the truth. My aunts and my mom actually told me very, very different stories. They all each had their own accounts of the abuse that was inflicted upon them by my grandfather. They all gave me vivid stories. And my mother was the first one to say that it was extremely abusive. His behavior was abusive. Therefore, that let me know, hey, that's not normal. And it started my journey on really educating myself on what abuse is and what it looks like. Now, here are some characteristics to show you or let you know, signs that maybe you were abused. It definitely leaves certain things, certain characteristics that will do. The first one is visual re-experience. One of the most common childhood trauma symptoms is re-experiencing traumatic events vividly. These recalls can be voluntary or involuntary, or simply called flashbacks. Involuntary flashbacks often happen in dreams. It's really sad because I know a few friends of mine that have had night terrors. They've had literal nightmares of things that have already happened in their childhood. They would wake up screaming and in sweat, and, literally sleep talking, saying, please don't. And it was because their childhood, they experienced a lot of physical abuse. that is one of the signs, is the visual re-experience. You constantly re-experience these traumatic events. Another one is reenactment. Reenacting can occur as single behaviors, repeated behaviors, or bodily responses. The individuals are often unaware that this is happening. This is also simply called continuing the cycle. So that is what I like to call it, because reenacting what was done to you is pretty much continuing the cycle of abuse. For example, my father was extremely abused by his father physically and mentally and emotionally. And, he would constantly hit him, and beat them for almost no reason. I mean, they could simply be in the wrong place, in his way, and he will just grab an object and beat them until they were bruised, and sometimes even made them bleed. He reenacted that anger with me. It wasn't as severe, but he did. I felt like I was walking on eggshells for most of my life. He did constantly grab the belt, which was his choice of tool. Thankfully, it wasn't anything else, but, and he would hit me multiple times, and it was what he knew. It was what he lived. And, that was really difficult for me for a while. But that's another thing. They reenact what they lived. The final one is fear development. Survivors can experience intense fears or prolonged mental distress when exposed to cues that symbolize or resemble aspects of their trauma. They may develop phobias and avoid triggers. Triggers may be in the form of an environment, person, a conversation, or an object. Even an activity. They may also be afraid of small, mundane situations. And an example of that is me. I get scared when somebody starts yelling. It makes me afraid, because that's a trigger for me. When someone starts screaming, whether it's at me or whether I'm close to it, I literally start getting afraid, like back when I was young, because that was one of the things. My dad would scream a lot, and I know what came after the screaming was the physical abuse. And it just scares me every time. It still scares me. I'm in my 30s and I still get scared. So that's another symptom of childhood trauma, childhood abuse, and even adult abuse. People that are in abusive relationships as an adult. Those are the 3 signs. And it makes me really happy to share this with everyone, because believe it or not many people know these things. The first thing that I had to do to start my healing process was admit to myself, admit that my mom, my father, my grandmother had all abused me. They abused me physically and psychologically, and I had to come to terms with that. And that is hard. It's not easy, because you love these people. I mean, these people, sometimes, most of the time, we still love our parents and those loved ones that did this to us. And once I came to terms with it, I became angry. And that's what happens next, is the anger. And that's inevitable. When you have dealt with physical abuse, even sexual abuse, neglect, any form of abuse, you will be angry when you come to terms with it. And it takes longer. Some take longer than others. Everybody's healing journey is different. But I spent many years angry. It took me about 10 years to forgive my mother. It took me 15 years to forgive my grandma. And honestly, I still haven't fully forgiven my dad yet. He hasn't changed. He hasn't grown, and he still has the same abusive behaviors. So it's really difficult to fully forgive him. I honestly, I can't even have a relationship with him because of it, because of his toxic, abusive behavior. I'm just not willing to put my children through a dangerous situation that I know he can do. I'm just not willing to do that in any way. I grew up in a suppressive environment, and honestly, I feel like my culture, and not to talk negatively, because I am very proud of my Hispanic culture. I am Mexican American, and I was born in the US, and I am very proud of that. I love my culture. But there are some dark spots. Just like in every culture, there's those cultural dark spots where, certain things are just not quite right. One of them is suppression of women. In the Hispanic culture, it is still very common for the man to be dominant over the woman. Even in today's world, even in 2023, it's still going on very actively in the Hispanic culture in most families, whether it be here in the US or in Mexico. It happens. It's still happening. And that fosters abusive behavior. It literally is like the breeding ground for an abusive person, abusive man, because males are brought up to believe that they are superior to women. And therefore, if they have abusive tendencies, they will inflict that abuse, and they will think they're well within their rights to do it. Now, every culture has abusive people, every single culture, but I can't speak for other cultures. I can only speak for my own. And I hope that we grow as a culture, and that, in a few years, more awareness will come, and there will be more equality for women in the Hispanic culture. But as of right now, that's kind of what it looks like. And so growing up, I grew up in a very, very suppressive environment, and an environment where my dad was the head of the household, and what he said goes. And so my dad thought what he did was right, and any mistake I made, I got hit for. I got screamed at. I was belittled. I was told I was very, very stupid because I couldn't understand something when I was 5 years old. It started as young as 3 years old. I can remember being physically hit by my father. And my mother, she came from an abusive household, as I said earlier. Her father was extremely abusive. So she kind of just went from one abusive situation right to another. And that's what happens, when you have an abusive father or abusive parent, even mother, because trust me, moms can get abusive. They prep you to be with someone who will do the same thing. They prep you to be comfortable in that environment, comfortable in an abusive environment, and so you're subconsciously gonna try to find that when you get into a relationship. A lot of people are not conscious of it. This isn't something that you're conscious of, because a lot of people are like, I wouldn't choose to be with someone who is abusive towards me. No, of course not. None of us would. But it's a subconscious thing. We think it's normal. We feel comfortable. Even if we know it's not normal, that's where we feel comfortable. And that's how the cycle works. The kids get abused and they think that's comfort, and they go into an abusive relationship, and they have kids, and their kids are abused as well. So that's how it works. And my mother was a product of that. And so she was abusive too. She got frustrated. She was young. She married young to get out of the house. She got frustrated, and she abused me as well. In different ways than my father. It was mainly out of severe anxiety, and, she would just lash out, and it happened for a long time. I do have a relationship with my mom, and she has started her healing process a while back. And it took me 10 years to forgive her, but I finally did, because she finally came to terms with what had happened in my childhood, and she was able to take responsibility for it. And my grandmother, same concept. She abused me as well. Ever since I was very young, she would babysit me, and, I vividly remember her hitting me with plastic sticks and making me bleed. And so that's a little bit of my story. And as a young adult, I've done a lot of research. I've done a lot of self-healing. I've done a lot of trying to change this, trying to stop this cycle, because I did not want to inflict it on my children. My children are a big part of why I self-educated so much, so that I can change this cycle and not continue it for them. I knew it was wrong, and I knew that's not what I wanted for my children. And that's strong enough to break a cycle. Even people that don't have children, it has to be done for you. It has to be done because you know it's wrong and you want to change it. You can't live like that anymore. I hope this video has helped with the tips I gave. And remember, these tips, let me see if I can find them. These tips are tips on how to spot someone who has been abused, or how to see if you have been abused, if you have been a victim and you didn't really know it. Visual re-experience, reenactment, and fear development. Those are the three. And I hope this helps somebody, and I hope to see you all again soon in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and share and like my videos, and I'll see you guys again very soon.